Part 1. The greatest epistemological overthrow in the history of Eastern thought, initiated by Siddhartha Gautama, does not lie in creating a new moral system, but lies in the radical denial of an ontological constant, the existence of an independent subject, named the I, in the entire cognitive structure of humanity. The dualistic reference system always plays an absolute dominant role. We by default divide reality into two opposite poles. One side is the cognitive subject, which is ourselves, and one side is the object, the surrounding world. We dogmatically believe that hidden deep beneath this constantly fluctuating physical shell, there is a static atomic core, an unchanging coordinating center, standing behind all experiences. This belief is deeply rooted in the subconscious mind, until it is no longer a philosophical hypothesis, but becomes a vital axiom shaping all human behavior. However, when applying the phenomenological observation method to directly illuminate the structure of the mind, Siddhartha Gautama pointed out a destructive truth. The invariable constant that we call the I has absolutely no real entity. It is an optical illusion of perception, a simulated structure woven from conditioned reflexes and the attachment to linguistic concepts. The most disastrous confusion of humans originates from the trap of linguistic structure. Language demands that every action must have an executing subject. When a thought flashes through the mind, grammar forces us to say that I am thinking. When a painful feeling appears, we express that I am hurting. The constant repetition of this subject predicate structure over thousands of years has created a massive conceptual swap from the pronoun I being merely a convenient linguistic tool to distinguish individuals. In social communication, the human mind has automatically objectified this very concept, turning an empty noun into a real, metaphysical entity. We mistakenly believe that there is a thinking person standing separate from the stream of thoughts. There is a feeling person existing independently from feelings, but under a radical philosophical lens. This separation is completely unfounded. There is no subject standing behind the action itself. The stream of thoughts itself is the thinker. The feeling itself is the feeler, trying to find a pure I, detached from physical and psychological phenomena that are continuously arising and ceasing, is like trying to peel every layer of an onion to find a core located at the very center. You can peel forever, peel to the very last layer, and then realize there is no core. The ontology of the onion is the collection of all those layers. The human I also shares that same empty structure. The formation process of this ontological illusion is a continuous borrowing and patching from the objective world. From the moment an individual enters social consciousness, the mind starts the task of an identity gathering machine. It acquires a sound chain as a name acquires a nationality, a religious belief system, political viewpoints, and labels of class status. The mind uses the continuous flow of memory as glue to bind all these fragmented and random pieces together, creating an illusion of the continuity of existence. A psychological defense system is immediately erected around this patched structure. Humans self-identify their survival value with external pieces. When a personal viewpoint is refuted, we do not perceive it as a collision between two objective information streams, but feel it as a knife stabbing straight into the dignity of the I, thereby activating a reaction of hatred for self-defense. When a social status is stripped away, we do not consider it the change of a temporary title, but fall into a state of extreme existential crisis, believing that our being is being destroyed. This false identification is the root of all torment, because we are striving to protect something that inherently has no core. The core tragedy of humanity was generalized by Siddhartha Gautama through the unresolvable conflict between the nature of reality and the desire of the illusion. The ultimate desire of the simulated I is absolute fixation, is the permanent extension of its ownership and integrity. But objective reality is operated by the law of Anatta, meaning the continuous movement and destruction of the time flow. Every entity in the universe, from a biological cell to a stellar system, exists in a state of absolute impermanence. The friction between a surging reality on one side and the I, frantically straining to freeze the moment on the other side, is the genesis point of all states of dissatisfaction. Pain is not born from the decay of an object, because decay is the default attribute of the material world. Pain is born from the irrational clinging of perception when demanding the universe to operate around the fixed axis of the subject. We are continuously melting entities, but always carry the illusion of eternal icebergs. This cognitive overthrow does not aim to push humans into a state of panic or deny the existence of life. Realizing the I has no independent nature is the most crucial philosophical paving step to liberate humans from the prison of clinging. If the constant we always worship is merely a ghost woven from the habits of perception, then a thorny ontological question must be posed. When all social labels, titles and borrowed memories are completely stripped away, what is the true structure of the organism present right at this moment? What are the foundational components gathering and interacting with each other to operate this biological and psychological machine, so smoothly creating a perfect illusion of a unified individual that has blinded humanity for thousands of years? Part 2. The answer to the ontological riddle about the true structure of humans was concluded by Siddhartha Gautama in an ultimately subversive Doctrine, the Five Aggregates. If human perception always mistakenly believes a human is a unified block, an intact entity, revolving around a central soul, then this doctrine swings a sharp knife, cutting all those illusory connecting threads. Under the phenomenological vision, Siddhartha Gautama defined this present organism not as a noun indicating an object, but as a verb indicating an operation. It is the continuous gathering and dispersing the temporary assembly of five groups of physical and psychological elements interacting at a furious speed. The term aggregate in ancient languages carries the meaning of an accumulation, a heap, or a collection. Using the word collection instead of entity instantly strips away the independent and eternal nature of the so-called human being. These five groups of elements include form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The relentless friction and intertwining of these five collections create a magic show so perfect that it makes perception deceive itself, generating an optical hallucination named the I. To completely deconstruct this existence machine, we are forced to separate each collection to observe them under the lens of impermanence. The first collection, also the coarsest outer shell, is the aggregate of form representing the entire physical body. The dualistic mind always clings to this body, considering it as I, or mine, the most solid fortress of life. But phenomenology points out that this body is essentially just a transit station of natural elements. The material block that you call your body is continuously borrowing earth from food, borrowing water from rivers, borrowing heat from the sun, and borrowing air from the atmosphere. Billions of cells are born and die in every fraction of a second, turning the body into a constantly flowing physical river. You cannot find any fixed eye hiding in a fingernail, a strand of hair, or a drop of decaying blood. Ontological identification with the form aggregate is a blind investment in a project guaranteed to go bankrupt, because the default attribute of matter is disintegration. The second collection is the aggregate of feeling, representing the entire sensory system, including pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. When a physical phenomenon impacts a sensory organ, the feeling aggregate is immediately activated. However, a feeling is merely a purely physiological event, appearing and disappearing instantly. Tragedy occurs when perception jumps in to intervene, turning an objective event into a subjective experience by attaching a subject, I am suffering, or I am ecstatic, attaching the pronoun I to a stream of impermanent feelings is the first operation in erecting the prison cage of clinging. Following the operation of feelings, the philosophical drill goes deep into the third collection, the aggregate of perception. This is the most sophisticated categorizing and labeling machine of the mind. The perception aggregate operates by comparing newly received signals with the massive data warehouse of past memories to name objects. It sees a red band of color and immediately labels it a flower. It hears a stream of sounds and immediately identifies it as an insult. The perception aggregate is the dualistic lens distorting naked reality. It makes us never see the world exactly as it is presenting, but only see prejudices and reflections, edited and molded by the mind. An eye built on the foundation of perception is essentially just a sleepwalker wandering in a museum filled with delusional labels. Next is the aggregate of mental formations, representing psychological reactions, volitional impulses, and habits cultivated from beginningless time. Mental formations are the massive engine driving all behaviors, creating what Eastern philosophy calls karma. It is the blind thrust making humans continuously react automatically to environmental stimuli, escaping discomfort and craving to possess comfort. Mental formations create a powerful illusion of free will, making humans believe there is a captain actively steering life, while essentially they are just puppets pulled by psychological reflexes operating beyond the control of consciousness. The final collection, also the most subtle core, often mistaken for a soul, is the aggregate of consciousness, or pure awareness. Many philosophical and religious systems have imposed that the consciousness aggregate is the immortal I, an entity standing to observe the other four aggregates. But Siddhartha Gautama ruthlessly smashed this illusion with the principle of dependent origination. The consciousness aggregate is not a self-illuminating light source. It cannot exist independently on its own. It is just a spark flashing when there is a collision between two objects, a sensory organ and a cognitive object. When the eye touches a form, visual consciousness arises. When the ear touches a sound, auditory consciousness arises. If there is no object to perceive, awareness also instantly vanishes into nothingness. The consciousness aggregate, therefore, is also just a broken flow, continuously arising and ceasing entirely, dependent on objective conditions. At this point, the phenomenological map of humans has been fully laid out. A temporarily borrowed material block, a flashing stream of feelings, a flawed labeling machine, a chain of blind reactions, and a dependent awareness. These five collections intertwine, spinning in the dance of birth and death. And there is absolutely no gap to stuff an independent eye or soul in between. Humans are completely devoid of an ontological center to completely smash the final resisting effort of the intellect. Ancient dialectics used a classically subversive metaphor, the image of a horse chariot. When we see a chariot running on the road, language and cognitive habits force us to call it a chariot. But if we perform a physical grand surgery, removing the two wheels to a corner, removing the axle, dismantling the cabin, untying the reins, and letting the horses go, when all parts have been separated and laid scattered on the ground, a sharp philosophical question is posed. At this moment, where is the chariot? We cannot point at a wheel and call it a chariot. We also cannot point at an invisible empty space among that pile of materials and affirm it as the nature of the chariot. The cold truth is exposed. The chariot is just a conventional noun, a temporary label created by humans to serve communication purposes when parts combine together according to a certain structure. Outside of that structure, there is absolutely no chariot entity existing independently. Searching for the ontology of the chariot is a desperate and logically flawed effort. Applying this cruel dialectic to human existence, the doctrine of Anatta is established as an absolute truth. What you call I, myself, or my soul is essentially just a functional conventional noun. Exactly like the noun chariot, it is used to indicate the temporary gathering of the five aggregates within a limited time frame. When this gathering disintegrates, the I also immediately evaporates, leaving absolutely no trace in the universe. Stubbornly believing and protecting a conventional illusion is the most severe misalignment of perception, the root pushing humanity into a cycle of perpetual torment. However, when the ontology of the I has been dissected and proven to be completely empty, a paradoxical existential question continues to arise and tear the mind. If no I truly exists, then why can the concept of ownership of things labeled as mine expand so terrifyingly and create the bloodiest possessive tragedies in human history? Part 3. If the I was proven by Siddhartha Gautama to be merely an optical illusion born from the fast operation of the five aggregates, then the concept of mine is the desperate tentacle that illusion extends out to cling to reality. The ego deep inside always carries a primal fear of an ontological emptiness. It vaguely perceives that Its structure is extremely loose, easily blown away by the winds of impermanence. To fight this existential panic, the ego must execute the most sophisticated survival strategy: territorial expansion. It begins pasting ownership labels on objects belonging to the objective world, using those objects as anchors to prove its own existence. The concept of mine was born from there, not as a legal tool to divide assets in human society, but as a breathing tube system maintaining life for a ghost. The more it owns, the more the ghost feels real, massive, and solid. This territorial expansion begins from the coarsest and closest things. The mind pastes the mine label on a block of the form aggregate and calls it my body. It pastes labels on printed paper pieces and calls it my money. It pastes labels on steel and concrete blocks and calls it my house. When a man buys a supercar, he does not just buy a vehicle assembled from metal and a combustion engine under the phenomenological lens. He is buying a surface area to expand the border of his eye. When the car runs on the street, attracting admiring gazes, his ego is stroked. He feels his being swelling up, sparkling and full of power. But accompanying that swelling is a tremendously expensive price to pay. The area vulnerable to damage is also exponentially expanded. If someone accidentally scratches a small mark on the car's paint layer, that man immediately erupts in anger and feels extreme pain. This pain does not originate from a chemical layer peeling off the metal surface, because metal knows no pain. The pain originates from the mine label being scratched and torn. The simulated eye feels it has just been attacked and brutally trimmed. But the trap of the possessive pronoun does not stop at the material world. It extends its invisible tentacles into a territory thousands of times more sophisticated and dangerous, the world of relationships and ideologies. The mind begins pasting the mine label on other living beings. We call a stranger my lover, my wife, my husband, or my child. Attaching a possessive pronoun to a breathing, thinking, and constantly changing human is the pinnacle of the ego's arrogance and ignorance. We turn an independent stream of life into an owned object. Once pasting the mine label on a person, the ego automatically strips that person's freedom. It demands that person must behave exactly according to its pre-written script, must always be loyal, must always bring safety, so it does not face emptiness. Love, under the manipulation of the mine concept, degrades into an imprisonment in the name of romance. When a lover changes their heart, or when a child decides to follow a contrary path, the ego immediately collapses. The gut-wrenching pain is not because we love them too much, but because the territorial structure of the I is collapsing. The most important piece forming our identity is being ruthlessly stripped away. More terrifyingly, the ego also expands its possession into the world of abstract concepts. It pastes the mine label on chaotic thoughts and calls them my opinion, my ideal, or my religion. When an ideology has merged as one with the I, humans are willing to do the craziness things to protect it. Every bloodiest religious war in history, every fiery debate destroying each other on social media shares the same ontological pattern. The collision between I trying to protect their cognitive territories. When someone refutes your opinion, you seemingly lose the ability to listen objectively, because your brain has identified it as an assassination targeting your existence. You must argue back, must win, must destroy the opponent with words or forced just to affirm that my opinion is right and therefore my I is real and superior. The prison of possession has completely locked human perception inside the walls of arrogance and stubbornness. Siddhartha Gautama stripped bare this entire possession mechanism by placing it on the scale against the law of Anatta. The ultimate tragedy of the possessive pronoun lies in the fact that the ego tries to use the mind label to freeze things that are inherently always flowing. How can you own a river when its water always flows to the great sea? How can you own a body when its cells are gradually heading towards disintegration? How can you own a soul when it is always subject to the impact of tens of thousands of changing conditions every day? Clinging to the mind concept is an asymmetrical war guaranteed to fail against natural laws. The more labels you paste, the more ticking time bombs you create in your life. Every mind thing is an appointment for a pain in the future, because absolutely no entity lies outside the domination of destruction. Absolute freedom can only appear when humans manually peel the mind labels off all phenomena, returning everything to its true Tathata nature, returning the body to nature's metabolism, returning the car to metal's destruction, returning the lover to emotions' free operation, and returning viewpoints to the reference system's relativity. However, when facing this radical solution, the human mind once again falls into extreme panic. If I no longer own anything, if no one is mine and no ideology is mine, if the I is also erased, then what meaning is left in this life? Does completely destroying the architecture of the ego and possession push humans down a black hole of desperate nihilism, turning us into emotionless, lifeless logs? Or is it the only door opening a dimension of existence thousands of times grander, more brilliant, and more free? Part 4. When facing the truth of Anatta, the first and most instinctive reaction of the human mind is not liberation, but an extreme existential terror. It is like you are standing on a precarious rock and someone suddenly pulls that rock from under your feet. The mind, inherently accustomed to clinging to a coordinating center named I, immediately screams in panic. If no I exists, then who is living this life? Who is feeling sadness and joy? Who will take responsibility for the ongoing actions? And if liberation means completely erasing the I, will humans not turn into a meaningless, cold, and desperate empty space? This is the final defensive wall, the greatest intellectual trap set by the ego to prevent humans from stepping through the door of awakening. It sophisticatedly swaps Siddhartha Gautama's concept of Anatta with an ultimately deadly and pessimistic ideology, nihilism. Nihilism denies all values, all meanings, and all structures of reality. It considers life an absurd play, and because there is no eternal I, all living efforts are useless. Humans sink into indifference, coldness, and surrender. But the Anatta doctrine is absolutely not such a negative destruction. Realizing there is no fixed I does not make your existence disappear. The sun still rises, the river still flows, the flower still blooms, and your body is still breathing rhythmically. What is destroyed is not life, but the illusion of an owner of that life. Imagine you are carrying a backpack filled with heavy boulders named fame, pride, past traumas, and future expectations. You carry it through every journey, exhausted and in pain, because you blindly believe that backpack is your very life. When Anatta philosophy shows you that backpack is essentially just a borrowed burden, you take it off and throw it into the deep abyss. You do not die. On the contrary, you Feel ultimate relief. Your shoulders are free. Your steps become light. The destruction of hallucination does not lead to death, but it leads to the most authentic and brilliant life. The phenomenology of Siddhartha Gautama points out an exquisite and shocking truth. Experiences still occur fully, without needing anyone to stand out and own those experiences. There are streams of thoughts flowing but no thinker. There are actions being executed but no independent agent pulling the strings. There is joy and there is sadness continuously arising and ceasing, but no one is joyful or sad. Stripping this subject label does not turn humans into senseless logs, but conversely it pushes the quality of presence to the peak of sharpness and purity. When you watch a beautiful sunset without the eye jumping into intervene, without the whining voice in the head, comparing this sunset with yesterday's sunset, without the greed to possess or freeze that moment, then the beauty of the sunset will flood your entire perception. There is no boundary between the observer and the observed scene. You and the sunset melt into each other, becoming a single and intact aesthetic event. That is the absolute power of emptiness. When the narrow and fragile shell of the eye is smashed, humans do not fall into a dark nihilistic realm, but step out into an endless space of existence. You realize your being is not limited inside this tiny flesh layer. Your existence is tightly and inseparably interwoven with the entire causal network of the universe. You are breathing the air from tropical forests on the other hemisphere. You are nourishing the body with the light of a star millions of light years away. If there were no sky, no ocean, no farmers sowing seeds on the field, the biological machine named you would immediately stop operating and disintegrate. The independent concept of the ego turns out to be just an ignorant arrogance. The truth is everything intertwines into a net, relying on each other to arise and cease. You are present in all and all are present in you. When thoroughly understanding this principle of dependent origination, existential loneliness is immediately erased from consciousness. The torment of having to continuously strain yourself to fight the outside world disappears, because there is no longer an outside world threatening an inside world. The dualistic boundary division has completely collapsed. Manually smashing the illusion of the eye is not a loss but a grand rebirth. It liberates a massive energy source, energy that previously the mind only used to maintain, defend, and stroke the hallucinatory shell of the ego. When no longer bothering to protect a personal image, human perception becomes completely still, sharp and flexible like a water stream. But understanding the Anatta doctrine at a theoretical and phenomenological level is only half of this grand journey. The most practical question posed is, how can a human who has completely dismantled the ego structure continue to exist, interact and work amid a society full of individuals still tightly imprisoned in the jail of clinging? When the distance between the I and the objective world is blurred, how great and different will their love and actions be compared to the possessive love of those being manipulated by the ego? Part 5. The collapse of the illusory I does not lead to a pessimistic, immobile state, but actually is the only door opening an art of living at the highest level, selfless existence amid a selfish world. When an individual has completely dismantled the ontological positioning system named the ego, their outer appearance has absolutely no difference compared to the rest of humanity. They still wake up, still wear clothes, still step into office buildings, still run corporations or sweep the streets. However, the operating software inside their mind has been completely replaced. If the mind of a normal person is a tangled network of barriers of security scanners, continuously categorizing whether an event brings benefit or harm to the eye, then the mind of an awakened person is a transparent empty space. They step into life with a mechanism that ancient philosophy calls non-action, acting without clinging to the results of the action, working without needing a representative subject to receive glory or suffer humiliation. In the fierce working environment of the modern era, humans are often drained of vitality, not because of the physical work intensity, but because they must carry a massive volume of psychological pressure created by they fear failure because failure will reduce the value of their being. They crave success because success is the golden layer to coat the ego statue. This internal tension consumes 90% of the life energy of an individual. Conversely, when experiencing the principle of Anatta, humans are completely liberated from the fear of results. They dedicate all their intellectual power to the present, solving each problem with ultimate focus and the quietest wisdom. When you are no longer obsessed with what others think about me, when you do not identify the failure of a project with the collapse of your identity, you will achieve an absolute flow state. Creative energy blooms limitlessly because it is no longer choked when having to flow through the narrow funnel of personal greed and fear. Selfless people build the greatest careers not because they crave power, but because they act as a pure conduit, allowing the energy of the universe to operate freely through their body and mind to serve the common evolution of humanity. The rebirth of selfless perception simultaneously radically redefines the concept of love, one of the categories most ruthlessly distorted by the ego in life. Ordinary love always comes with the possessive pronoun, mine, and an implicit contract of reciprocation. We love a person because that person brings a feeling of safety, satisfies the cravings of the eye, and fills the existential empty spaces inside us. That is a transactional love full of fear. If the other person changes, love instantly turns into hatred. But when the hallucinatory I has been dismantled, the boundary between subject and object is blurred. Love rises into a state of absolute compassion. This compassion does not originate from a forced moral command, but is an inevitable ontological consequence. When thoroughly understanding the operation of the five aggregates, you see the opposite person not as a fixed entity to own, but as a stream of feelings and perceptions, also suffering the torment of the law of impermanence, exactly like you. You love them by appreciating their presence in this moment without generating the craving to bind. It is a boundless love, like sunlight illuminating all things without demanding reciprocation, loving completely but ready to let go calmly when the conditions are exhausted. Finally, the collapse of the I completely resolves the greatest, most primal, and most obsessive fear of all living beings, the fear of death. The entire foundation of survival belief systems is built to seek a soothing for the terror. When facing the moment of closing eyes forever, the ego trembles before death, because death means the complete erasure of the territorial structure it painstakingly built. But Siddhartha Gautama, with a sharp slash of wisdom, overturned the whole problem. How can you lose something you never owned? How can the death of me occur when the I inherently never existed as a real entity? When understanding that this biological machine is merely the temporary borrowing of material elements, and the mind stream is merely the flashing interaction of impulses. You will view death not as a destruction but merely as a grand metabolic process of the universe. The elements of the five aggregates are simply dismantled, returned to nature to continue constituting new life forms. No one dies, there is only the continuous transformation of energy streams. This perception completely strips the venom of annihilation, allowing humans to live fully in every breath, without being threatened by the shadow of death. The anatomical journey of the collapse of the I ends not with an abstract doctrine but with the most powerful existential invitation. The authentic picture of Anatta has been laid out before your eyes, pointing out that the chains imprisoning us do not come from social circumstances, do not come from destiny, but come from voluntarily acting as a slave to a simulated ghost. We have the right to choose. Continue carrying on our backs the boulder of pride, of possession, of traumas, to live a life of trembling fear, or bravely let go of this grand hallucination. Smash the monument of the internal dictator to step into the flow of original freedom. That freedom lies right in the moment you realize the empty space between the streams of thoughts lies in the birdsong, not distorted by the filter of judgment, lies in the fact that you can enjoy everything in this world without needing to paste the mind label on them. Eastern philosophy is not termite-eaten books in the library, but the sharpest sword for you to manually cut your own binding threads. Now, when the drill has touched the core of perception, when the final mask of illusion has been peeled off, are you ready to embrace the grand emptiness, walking the first steps of a completely free human on the ground of this naked reality?